Measure passes. Let's move back to file item 65, Senator Morell. Pass on file. Moving forward to file item 67, Senator Leno, not at his desk. Members, file item 68, Senator Block, not at his desk. File item 69, Senator Pavley. Secretary, please read.
Senate Bill 20 by Senator Pavley and Acrolein to water.
Senator Pavley.
Yes, thank you very much, members. I wanted to start with a quote from the Sacramento Bee editorial in support of Senate Bill 20, and they say, in times of drought, when every drop counts, we ought as Californians be able to count every drop. That pretty much sums up the importance of this bill. This bill is about well logs, and the driller is required by law right now to provide to DWR a well completion report with the state of California for each well drilled. These reports contain critical information for groundwater management, consulting hydrologists, academics, and others interested in geologic and hydrologic characteristics of groundwater. Because of a law back in 1951 that was protecting sort of different kinds of well drillers and access to the information, this outdated law is only not needed, it's counterproductive, especially in times of drought. When neighbors want to know when someone drills a well over their same groundwater basin, their aquifer, perhaps how deep it is, because they want to know how deep they have to have their well. Is there plumes that are contaminated? What type of soils are there? Unfortunately, those who would benefit from this information cannot access to it. Only government agencies can. And I wanted to point out a piece of paper that was distributed as a floor alert that said all this information was already public to all these academics and hydrologists and groundwater management, et cetera. That is not true. It shows in the records and in our law, it shall be available only to government agencies and someone who owns the well. That's who has access to it. This would be extremely helpful also to people who share a groundwater basin and they want to put in a septic tank or modify a septic tank. You want to know what is going on in that basin. You may not know that California is the only Western state that restricts public access to well logs. In fact, 10 of the 11 Western states provide access to the well logs on the internet. You can see all this information, everyone can, online. Many of our own local water agencies provide maps of location and wells and other online information. We're behind when this comes. The governor vetoed a bill I had carried a year ago because of the provisions that made it restricted to public access. So we worked very closely with DWR and CalLIMA and the Department of Public Health to ensure responsible public access to this information. So this compromise measure is consistent with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act that most of you voted for last year. And this bill will allow limited access to well log information. It would make well logs available to the public under limited circumstances. A required person would have to request a report to do so on a form identifying themselves by name and address and the reason for the request. So we would know who they are. They have to put down exactly why they need this information. It requires the release of well logs to comply with the privacy and other provisions of the Information Practices Act. It requires a disclosure statement regarding the appropriate use of the data. And it also authorizes DWR to charge a fee for anyone who comes up and asks for the report. The bill addresses and resolves the various security concerns raised by some of the opponents. This is an important and valuable piece of information. And back to that Sacramento Bee editorial, when they looked at the opposition who claimed that we would be subject to acts of terrorism and theft and everything if this information became public, they summed it up in one word: nonsense. And after reviewing the records of the other states in our country that have full online information to well log records, we are not seeing any problems with this information having a limited public review, especially in times of drought, especially when every drop counts. Ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Pavley. Senator Nielsen?
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I certainly respect Senator Pavley's passion in this area, and in fact, one of her bills passed at the end of session last year. And what we're looking at here is a sweeping intrusion of government into our private lives and onto our private property. As to those conditions, if you build in some conditions of the rights of the property owner to dispute the request, to dispute their findings, to justify their request, in other words, some due process, well, maybe we have a place to begin a conversation. I probably wouldn't get there even with that. This is open season for a neighbor who has some issue with you, with a septic tank, a domestic well, an agricultural well. Why, if the cities think they're going to be exempt from this, they're silly. These wells are also going to be, sooner or later, subject to such scrutiny. But this almost unlimited, I don't consider this restrained public access. And what is a general need of anyone all over California for what somebody's well in Colusa County is doing? There are already existing regulations and authorities that govern and control such issues. Counties already have absolute power and control over the groundwater, and in fact, power they've lost last year, subject to such legislation. Now the counties have to answer to the state, and the state rules. I have enough problems with that. Ladies and gentlemen, about 5 years ago, there was an attempt at going after the septic tanks and requiring, I think it was annual inspections. I called it then the Great Septic Tank Rebellion. Exploded. People all over California, including a lot of in coastal areas, including Marin County, really raised a fuss because their wells were now going to be subject to this scrutiny and this arbitrary enforcement. Don't think that this is just a simple know-nothing bill, ladies and gentlemen. This is giving your government, and I'm speaking to the public out beyond this building, your government control over your lives, your personal property, and understand historically groundwater has always been viewed, with one case law exemption, as a private property right. Now just about anybody is going to know just about everything that goes on your property related to your water. I urge a no vote.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen. Senator Stone?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I also rise to oppose this bill and appreciate the author's good work to enhance water quality throughout the state of California in her tenure in the legislature. Over the years, there's been numerous state and federal laws that have been passed to protect our water supplies. This bill would seem to be flying in the face of all those positive actions. This bill could very well subject drinking water and livestock wells to potential sabotage and security risks that outweigh any benefit that making these records public would provide. What is the compelling reason to make such information available to the public on a statewide basis? An unintended consequence of this bill would be providing a roadmap for copper and metal thieves, as many groundwater pumps are electrically powered with copper wire and metal that would make them vulnerable to theft. I'm sure you've all heard from your county supervisors and your city officials about the significant copper thefts that continue to go on in our communities. This would only make it easier for thieves to go after these great sources of copper. I understand the intent of the offer, but I fear that this would do more harm than good. I think it's also an invasion on private property rights that my colleague fully addressed. And for those reasons, Mr. President and members, I urge a no vote.
Thank you, Senator Stone. Members, any further debate or discussion? Seeing none, Senator Pavley, you may close.
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe just a quick wrap up here, if I may. To me, this just makes common sense, especially in our 4th year of record drought. We're asked all around the state for people to measure how much water they're using. We can't manage what we don't measure. I think surrounding overlying property owners in a groundwater basin have the right to access information before they spend a ton of money trying to figure out if they can afford to drill a even deeper well to compete in that race to the bottom. This is just practical common sense. In fact, Governor Brown had stated recently, California is the only Western state that does not provide ready access to well reports. That should be changed. Again, out of the 11 Western states, we're the only one that doesn't allow public reasonable access to groundwater well logs. And in fact, of 10 of the 11 states, it's online for everyone to see. In our state, we're asking that they simply come to the Department of Water Resources, fill out a report and form so we know who's asking, where they live, why they want that information, and they even have to have pay a fee. So this is not irresponsible. This is actually very responsible to have this limited access to what I consider extremely important information, especially in light of the fact that 60% of our water supply comes from groundwater basins. It's even more important now. Ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Pavley. Secretary, call the roll.
Allen. Aye. Anderson. No. Bates. No. Bell. Aye. Berryhill. No. Block. Aye. Cannella. No. De Leon. Fuller. No. Gaines. No. Galgiani. Glazer. Hall. Hancock. Aye. Hernandez. Aye. Hertzberg. Aye. Hill. Aye. Wisso. Aye. Huff. No. Jackson. Aye. Lada. Aye. Leno. Aye. Leva. Aye. Liu. Aye. McGuire. Aye. Mendoza. Mitchell. Aye. Monning. Aye. Morlock. No. Morrell. No. Wynn. No. Nielsen. No. Pan. Pavley. Aye. Roth. No. Runner. No. Stone. No. Vidak. No. Wachowski. Aye. Wolk. Wolk, aye.
Secretary, call the absent members.
De Leon. Galgiani. Glazer. Hall. Mendoza. Pan.
Secretary, call the absent members.
De Leon. Galgiani. Glazer. Hall. Mendoza. Pan.
Senator Pavley moves the call. Let's see, Senator Huff, for what purpose do you rise?
Republican Caucus in the Cox Lounge.
Republican Caucus. '67, Senator Leno. Secretary, please read.
No, Mr. President, before we read, I just want to say, given that one may take a little more time, I'll go to some of the others.
Oh, okay.
And leave that a little bit for later.
Okay, so let's then move to file item 111. Secretary, please read.
Senate Bill 441 by Senator Leno, an act relating to redevelopment.
Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, colleagues, for letting the conferees get a few bills out of the way so we can go back to conference committee by 2 o'clock. This bill will authorize San Francisco, it is a district bill, to use bond financing to fund and construct over 3,300 permanent affordable housing units as we build a new residential neighborhood around the Trans-Bay Terminal Center. The bill allows San Francisco's successor agency to fulfill enforceable obligations that the California Department of Finance has finally and conclusively determined to have survived redevelopment dissolution. The bill has no opposition. It's sponsored by the mayor of San Francisco, and I ask for your aye vote.
Members, any debate or discussion? Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly appreciate the author's concern for low to moderate income housing, and I certainly understand where he resides. You see some very expensive real estate and some important challenges, and I think that one of the greatest components of redevelopment law was having the 20% set aside so that we could build low to moderate income housing throughout the state and in all of our counties, and certainly in local government. We were very disappointed. For those of us that serve in local government, we were very disappointed when redevelopment was taken away, a very important tool in providing that necessary affordable housing and certainly providing money for other benefits. My concern is that we have a lot of low to moderate income housing shortages in Riverside County as well. And if we're going to do this, I think it should be universally expanded throughout the state of California, and I would get behind it. But I think just selectively picking one county that has the same problems that many of us do in our respective counties, and to isolate the funding for that one county, I think is not appropriate. And so I would gladly support this, but I'd like to see it homogeneously applied to all of our counties that are struggling to provide affordable housing for our constituents, and respectively would vote no and urge a no vote on this.
Thank you, Senator Stone. Members, any other debate or discussion? Seeing none, Senator Leno, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Out of respect for our limited time here, I will spare you the severity of the housing crisis in San Francisco, and I recognize there is a housing need across the state of California. This is not, as there is no opposition to the bill, any special gift to San Francisco. The Department of Finance, and we've been working with them for over 2 years on this very issue, has made the determination that these finally and conclusively are enforceable obligations. And I think we all recognize that the governor has been extremely conservative and tight in allowing there to be any leakage from what they believe to be finally and conclusively enforceable obligations. This is a statutory obligation San Francisco has to replace some thousands of units of affordable housing that were destroyed during the redevelopment years of the 1950s and 60s. These can only be, this is bond financing, but to be used for that very specific purpose, and I ask for your aye vote.
Great, thank you, Senator Leno. Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen? Aye. Anderson? No. Bates? No. Bell? Aye. Berryhill? No. Block? Aye. Canella? No. De Leon? Aye. Fuller? No. Gaines? No. Galgiani? Glazer? Aye. Hall? Aye. Hancock? Aye. Hernandez? Aye. Hertzberg? Aye. Hill? Aye. Wesso? Huff? Aye. Huff? No. Jackson? Aye. Lada? Aye. Leno? Aye. Leyva? Aye. Liu? Aye. McGuire? Aye. Mendoza? Aye. Mitchell? Aye. Monning? Aye. Morlock? No. Morrell? Wynn? Nielsen? Pan. I. Pavley. I. Roth. I. Runner. No. Stone. No. Vidak. No. Wachowski. I. Wolk. Wolk, aye. Nielsen,
Secretary,
no.
call the absent members.
Galgiani. I. Morrell. No. Wynn.
Ayes 26, noes 13. Measure passes. Members, let's move to file item 120. Secretary, please read.
Senate Bill 518 by Senator Leno, an act relating to victims of violent crimes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, colleagues, a bill with bipartisan support and no opposition deals with trauma recovery centers, which deal with victims of violent and traumatic crime in a holistic fashion, dealing with their mental, physical, and emotional needs all under one roof. There have been national studies and awards afforded to the Trauma Recovery Pilot Project, which was developed in San Francisco with state general funds about 13 years ago. We now have expanded to 5 other cities with the support of this legislature. The idea is to continue to expand and invest in these centers because they get back people after traumatized by violent crime back to work faster, kept off drugs and alcohol, keep families intact, have all of these important benefits. The reason for this bill is due to the passage of Prop 47. It requires that 10% of approximately $200 million a year in savings we will get for having low-level offenders no longer in our state prison system must go to services for victims of violent and traumatic crime. We want to make sure that those dollars are spent as effectively as possible through our Trauma Recovery Center model. That's what this bill will do. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Leno. Members, any debate or discussion? Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of SB 518. Want to applaud my colleague and senator from San Francisco. This is a model program, trauma recovery pilot project that needs to be expanded to other areas of the state, and I appreciate him bringing this forward, and I also urge an aye vote.
Members, any further debate or discussion? Seeing none, Senator Leno, you may close.
Your aye vote, please.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen. I. Anderson. I. Bates. I. Bell. I. Berryhill. I. Block. I. Canella. I. De Leon. I. Fuller. Gaines. I. Galgiani. Glazer. I. Hall. I. Hancock. I. Hernandez. I. Hertzberg. I. Hill. I. Wesso. I. Huff. I. Jackson. I. Lara. I. Leno. I. Leva. I. Liu. I. McGuire. I. Mendoza. I. Mitchell. I. Monning. I. Morlock. I. Morrell. I. Wynn. I. Nilsen. I. Pan. I. Pavley. I. Roth. I. Runner. I. Stone. I. Vidak. I. Wachowski. I. Wolk.
Please call the absent members.
Fuller. I. Galgiani. I. Wolk. Aye. Mr. President.
Members, ayes 40, noes 0. Measure passes. Okay, we are now going to move members to file item 94. Senator Lara, are you prepared to bring this forward? Secretary, please read.
Senate Bill 291 by Senator Lara, an act relating to mental health.
Senator Lara.
Thank you, Mr. President, members. You know, members, every year we celebrate the Holocaust remembrance, and we also do the Armenian genocide remembrance. SB 291 assists communities and nonprofit organizations who serve individuals with trauma related to genocide access mental health services. Although California has made strides towards expanding mental health services, the Cambodian community has been largely excluded, in part because of their collapse together in a catch-all group such as Asian Pacific Islander category. SB 291 seeks to bring this community, as well as others who are affected by genocide, out of this umbrella and into their own separate category. Specifically, this bill will require an additional stakeholder for the Department of Healthcare Services, an expansion of the Office of Health Equity's mission relating to vulnerable communities, and a plan to be developed by the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development Department. SB 291 is critical for communities with trauma to improve their capacity and infrastructure to improve public health overall. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Lara. Members, any debate or discussion? Senator Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of SB 291, sponsored by my colleague from the City of Long Beach. This bill would expand the definition of vulnerable communities to include individuals who have experienced genocide related to trauma. SB 291 assists the Cambodian American population by refining existing statute to include groups that are unfortunately left out. Cambodian Americans across generations are still recovering from the genocide and the turmoil that Southeast Asia experienced back in the 70s. This event resulted in thousands of refugees escaping to the United States. In trying to create a better life for their family, these communities are disproportionately harmed by lack of access to health services. So I ask for your aye vote, and I will be supporting this bill today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nguyen. Senator Morlock.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to this bill. Colleagues, I served for 12 years on the Orange County Employee Retirement System Pension Board, which is a pension under the County Employees Retirement Law of 1937. And once you add presumptives and don't allow discretion, it just creates a lot of havoc. And so I am concerned with the not giving discretion, but making presumptives, and I'll oppose this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Morlock. Any more debate or discussion? Seeing none, Senator Lara, you may close.
Thank you. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen. Aye. Anderson. Aye. Bates. Aye. Bell. Aye. Berryhill. Aye. Block. Canella. Aye. De Leon. Aye. Fuller. Gaines. Galgiani. Gaines, aye. Galgiani, aye. Glazer. Hall. Aye. Hancock. Aye. Hernandez. Aye. Hertzberg. Aye. Hill. Aye. Hueso. Aye. Huff. Jackson. Aye. Lara. Aye. Leno. Aye. Leyva. Aye. Liu. Aye. McGuire. Aye. Mendoza. Aye. Mitchell. Aye. Monning. Aye. Morlock. No. Morrell. Nguyen. Aye. Nilsson. Pan. Aye. Pavley. Aye. Roth. Aye. Runner. Stone. Aye. Vidak. Aye. Wachowski. Aye. Wolk. Wolk, aye.
Secretary, call the absent members.
Block. Aye. Fuller. Glazer. Aye. Huff. Aye. Morrell. Aye. Nilsson. Runner.
Ayes 36, noes 1, measure passes. Members, let's move to file item 99. Senator Lara. Secretary, please read.
Senate Bill 320 by Senator Lara, an act relating to pupil fees.
Senator Lara.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. SB 320 improves the process for parents and students to obtain recourse when they believe they have been charged an unlawful student fee. Amidst reports that many public schools charge student fees to participate in educational activities, I authored AB 1574, which was signed into law in 2012. The complaint process, however, does not always work and is intended as some schools does not work as intended, as some schools continue to charge students to participate in activities that otherwise would be covered by the school. In sum, SB 320 streamlines the local pupil fee complaint process and strengthens the CDE's authority over appeals to ensure parents and students are afforded a fair process to recover unlawful expenses. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Leno. Members, any debate or discussion? Senator Lara, sorry. No debate or discussion. Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen. Anderson. Aye. Bates. Aye. Bell. I. Berryhill. I. Block. I. Canella. I. De Leon. I. Fuller. I. Gaines. I. Galgiani. Glazer. I. Hall. I. Hancock. I. Hernandez. I. Hertzberg. I. Hill. Hueso. I. Huff. I. Jackson. I. Lara. I. Leno. I. Leyva. I. Liu. I. McGuire. Mendoza. I. Mitchell. I. Monning. I. Morlock. I. Morrell. I. Wynn. I. Nielsen. Pan. I. Pavley. I. Roth. I. Runner. I. Stone. I. Vidak. I. Wykowski. I. Wolk. Wolk, aye.
Secretary, call the absent members.
Allen. Galgiani. I. Hill. McGuire. Aye. Hill, aye.
Ayes 39, no 0. Measure passes.